We have a bit of time, so.
Ajahn, I have a question.
Okay.
I want to know, how do you do nothing?
How do you do nothing?
Yeah.
What prompts this question?
Because when I try to do nothing, I panic. I cannot. I need to be an observer or something. But when I tell myself not to do anything, I can't handle it.
Okay. So a very real sense of fear that arises at the prospect of doing nothing.
Yeah.
Is it me that's making the sound, or no? Okay. That's a very interesting question, because in fact this practice is rather awe-inspiring, because our habit is to be identified very much with a self, a sense of who and what we are, and very often this is based on what we've done, what we can do, our achievements, our successes, and even our failures all contribute to create this sense of being somebody. And the possibility that maybe we're nobody, that our whole structure of reality is artificial, is quite terrifying, actually, in one way. Everything that we think of ourselves as being just collapses. So I can understand that this might seem like a very awesome prospect, the possibility of being nothing and doing nothing. And it's something, I think, that comes about gradually as we contemplate our lives. And as we begin to taste, occasionally, from time to time, to taste the experience of not being anybody and not doing anything. I mean, I'm quite sure you can do it, and I'm quite sure you often do it, only you're just not aware of doing it. But as we become more aware of doing it and learn how to just relax with it, little by little, it becomes very pleasant. It's like putting down a huge burden. Such a relief to be able to just be, rather than constantly doing and fixing and rearranging the world. One of the practices that I very much like, which I can introduce perhaps after this question session, is it actually comes from the Zen tradition, the practice of asking a question and waiting, and a question that doesn't have an intellectual answer really, and just allowing the inner response to that, which is basically a sense of nothing, to manifest and to rest in that. That is one way I've found that one can have a little taste of this space that is not being anything or doing anything. So basically we, in our meditation, in fact the way that we'll do it is I'll say a question from time to time and just invite you to listen to the question, to notice how the mind struggles to find a response, and to suggest that you just relax, don't worry about finding a response, but just rather allow the sense of space that comes at the end of the question. And just allow that sense of space to be there for as long as it can. And then when the mind starts coming in again with its habitual chatter, we can ask another question. Or the same question again, like in the Korean tradition, I think they have a question like, what is here? And that just encourages people to actually rest in the awareness rather than to engage in any active thinking or doing or any expression of self. So, as I said, we can try that as an exercise. I also encourage you during the day, from time to time, just deliberately just to sit and having possibly look, allow yourself to, just to gaze and to see, experiment with doing that and notice the mind's tendency to comment on what you see, but just let those comments go. Don't involve yourself with them. As a way of just experiencing the mind just resting with the sensory impressions. So, as I said, I'm not surprised that you find it a little bit daunting, the prospect of not doing anything. But I suspect that as you cultivate a taste for it, as you develop a taste for it, you begin to experience it in a more relaxed way, you'll actually find that it's remarkably pleasant. So I hope that helps a little bit with that. It's not a practice I recommend for everybody, because my sense is that you have to have a good basis in the refuges, actually. So it's not that everything just disappears, but there's a taking up the position of Buddha Dhamma Sangha. So there's the awareness, there's the truth, the reality as you experience it, and there's a sense of, the integrity of your practice. This is something that there's a sense of self-respect and a sense of, it's not that you completely disappear. It's just that the ego is very much diminished. The activities of the ego consciousness is very much diminished at those times. Would be how I would describe it. Yeah. Yes, another question. Raj.
Ajahn, it is what she just asked you, just wanted to know more about it. I was thinking that when we say that doing nothing, even in our dreams, when we are sleeping, we are not doing anything, but yet thoughts keep on coming sometimes, and we dream a lot. So, actually speaking, doing nothing, is it possible? Because our mind does not rest unless until we focus it on something. Either we are intentionally focusing it on breathing when we are awake, or on sensations. But the moment we stop doing anything, is it possible? I don't know.
Well, we can try. We can try.
What would that mean, basically?
Really what I was trying to describe to Pale, where the mind is just resting. It's no longer reacting or manipulating or trying to do anything or initiate anything. It's just aware. It's just there in a state of awareness. And when you talk about dreams, I don't know whether, I suspect that my mind is actually quite active when I'm asleep, that there's all kinds of things going on that are creating the dreams and the reactions to the dreams. I don't know, but and there may be somebody who has more mindfulness in the sleep state than I have, which is not very much actually. So I don't know, but I think if we work with experience while we're awake and have a go at this little exercise, we may have a little bit of a a taste of experience of just not knowing and just being. Talking yesterday about the Buddha, and after his enlightenment, it wasn't that he stopped doing anything, but it was his speech, his action was coming from a place of emptiness. There wasn't a sense of self-involvement in what he was doing or saying. There was no trace left. He would do something, and obviously he could recall it if he wanted to, but it wasn't something that kind of lodged in his mind in the way that very often when we do or say something, we remember it, and we may have some kind of reaction to what we did or said, some kind of judgment or and so on. So that would be how I would talk about that. But there may be others who have... In fact, maybe we should invite, if there's anybody else who would like to say more about it, this question of doing nothing. Professor Dar, I think you may have something to say. I can see that there's something happening there.
Rose, because in one of the sessions I said that.
Okay.
I think we are assuming that doing nothing is nothing is another thing which we have to do. It's actually investigating who is the doer and finding that there's no doer. So if you investigate and find there's no doer, who's seeing? For example, if I sit, and say, I don't want to hear. Okay, I'm not going to hear. But still hearing is happening. The plane goes and hearing happens. I don't want to hear it, but it's still happening. So who's doing it? I'm not doing it. So it's an understanding. I think people are thinking that doing nothing, just as we do some activity, doing nothing is another thing which has to be done. That's my understanding.
Thank you, that's very clear, very helpful.
I remember in that session I had said, as another example I had said, you keep your eyes open and say, I refuse to see. Try it out. I don't want to see. Okay, do it. That will be doing something. You can't. Because seeing is going to happen. Conditions are there, seeing is going to happen. Only thing is, because of ignorance, we say, I am seeing. Well, there is no one who is seeing.
There is a very unsettling feeling when I actually attempt not to do anything. When I don't do anything. How do I put it?
When you're attempting to not do it, is that
Yeah.
what you want to say?
So there's a lot of panic inside. I mean, I'm not this, I'm not that, okay, I'm not the eyes or the ears, I'm not even the observer. But I'm observing.
Yeah, and I think I tried to explain at the beginning when you first asked the question why that panic happens.
Fear. Yeah.
And it's because, well, my sense is, it's because your usual way of perceiving yourself in relation to the world has been taken away, like taking the carpet from under your feet. Where are you standing? And that is a scary feeling. I like to use the expression awesome, which I understand now is a very popular expression with young people. They say, oh, it was awesome. But I don't really mean it like that. I mean, what I mean, it engenders a sense of awe, just like looking out into the vastness of space. and suddenly realizing your place in it, which is pretty small. Having seen yourself as the center of the universe, a big, significant somebody, suddenly you realize that actually that's not how it is. And this brings a sense of awe, a sense of wonder. So I would encourage you to contemplate that as the experience that you're having, rather than being terrified or scared or anything else. It's more like there's a sense of awe and a sense of needing to be to expand the heart and to stand very firmly in the refuge, like in the awareness. Let that awareness be the container for it. Because it is awesome. You know, it does bring a sense of awe when you realize. But I think you can take it. But it does require a kind of a firmness in your standing in the refuges. It's not an ego thing, not at all. And the scary thing is that the ego is, it's losing its footing. And that's, you know, I always say to people, like, meditation is, this way of practice is very bad news for the ego. Because, I mean, the ego is like a huge kind of shadowy thing, and if you put a light on a shadow, it can't exist. Which is a little bit like what we're doing. We're shining light onto the shadow, and the shadow can't exist any longer, and it knows that. And it's going to put up a very good struggle. So in your case, it's saying, this is really scary, you can't do this, no, don't go there, don't go there. It's trying to hold you back. Other people's, you know, we have all kinds of subtle ways that the ego, the self, tries to make us believe in it, tries to pull us off course. So it's a matter of just actually standing very firm, and like the Buddha, when he was, you know, after his enlightenment and before his enlightenment, I mean, he was tested many times by Mara, and each time he would just say, "I know you, Mara. I know you." He didn't have to go into a big fight with, you know, swords and daggers and threatening language. Just a simple recognition. And poor old Mara, when that happened, you know, he thought, "Oh gosh, he's seen me. He's understood. He's seen what I'm up to." And you know, Mara just gives up. So, "I know you, Mara. It's okay." So to find ways to actually support yourself in that sense of awe is what I would suggest as a strategy. And when it's too much, then come back to the breath. You know, come firmly into the body. You know, and you can remind yourself, you know, I'm a woman, my name is Payal. You know, I'm practicing Buddhist meditation. I have a strong yearning for liberation. That's why I'm here. You know, you can sort of put your props back in place, but do it very consciously. You know, you're not believing in those things, but they're kind of conscious supports for you when this does seem like too much. You know, because you know it can be too much. So, you know, we need to be careful how we approach it. So, very, very interesting question, and as I said, I think you can do it. But you know, you might need to just temper it a little bit. You know, and as I said, remember the refuges, remember the awareness of what's happening here and now. And contemplate, if you like, the sense of fearfulness. You know, how do you know you're afraid? What happens when you're afraid? What bodily sensations are there? You know, often there's a kind of feeling sort of around here that's connected with fear. Or the breathing may change, or tension around the shoulders, or you know, a feeling in your hands. So you can bring awareness to that as well. Yeah. Thank you. Another question.
Ajahn,
Oop. Things not happy.
When there is negative sensations on your body or in your mind, when you are feeling negative, when you are feeling low or in depression, then we should face that situation, or we should shift over to the object of meditation, that is breathe, or we should face that situation.
If you turn yours off, then I can Another important question, how to respond when you're feeling negative, depressed or confused, unhappy, or if you have a painful sensation in the body, unpleasant sensation in the body, you were meaning. And there's different things that can happen that you. It's mostly negative in the mind that you're asking about. Yeah. Negatively in the mind, okay. Different things are helpful at different times. One thing that I find helpful is to remind myself that this state hasn't always been there. So to remember anicca, it's part of a flow of conditions, it's changing. Even although when we are feeling depressed or unhappy, it can feel very permanent. When we're right in the middle of it, it feels very permanent. But so to remind ourselves, it's not permanent. And even to remember a time in the past when you felt happy can be helpful, just in introducing the possibility that this is going to change. It's not going to be permanently here. So that's a kind of way of contemplating it. We can also contemplate it in terms of the physical effect it has. How when you're feeling low, depressed, you don't really have very much energy. You don't want to do very much. Even going outside is a big effort. The prospect of seeing people interacting feels like a big effort. You don't really want to do that. You just want to stay kind of protected. So you can notice that as well. Observe that. It can be helpful in fact, even though we might feel like not doing anything, it can be helpful to do things. And I don't know your circumstances really, but it's sometimes just, if you're living on your own or if you have a room or somewhere, just tidying up your space, just taking time, putting effort, the energy that you have into arranging things so your room is tidy. Doing something nice for somebody else can be a way of supporting a kind of lifting out of a depressed state. The thing with depression is that often it makes us very inward, and it's difficult to see other people around us, to appreciate there are other people. So sometimes doing something for somebody else can help to lift the mood. And I don't suffer from, clinical depression or anything like that, but sometimes when I've felt a little bit low, I find just doing something kind for somebody else can help lift the mood. So doing things that make you feel good, that are going to make you feel good. So it's not that when you're feeling low and the encouragement is to investigate and to examine our experience from different points of view, it's not that we want to hold on to that state of being low, but more that we it can be more helpful to find ways to transform it. Recognizing the negativity that we can add on to a low state. So you feel low, you feel glum, and then you think, I don't like this feeling of being low and glum. I shouldn't have it. What have I done wrong? What am I doing wrong? How long is it going to last? Maybe it'll never go. You can have these kind of thoughts which kind of add to it. They compound it. Whereas if we can bring mindfulness to the condition and just recognize, okay, there's this mood. And that's already establishing yourself in mindfulness. There is this mood. You don't even have to name it, but just recognizing it, how it feels, and so on. And in that way, that's a kind of letting go. It's a kind of stepping back from it, rather than struggling with it or fighting with it. Just stepping back that can enable it to dissipate on its own. These are just thoughts that are coming to me. So it's a little bit of a muddle, but I hope it's a little bit helpful. Is it helpful? Actually, I can ask you. Do you find what I'm saying does it relate to your experience a little bit?
Shall we leave the practice of meditation for some time in such situation? Because it goes on multiplying. When we sit in meditation, the situation of the mind goes on multiplying.
So you're saying that when you meditate, it actually seems to make it worse?
It multiplies, whether it is a negativity or positivity. In meditation, it multiplies.
That's interesting that you say that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, it may be that doing a more active kind of meditation is helpful, bringing mindfulness to activity. So things like when you're walking around, have that as your walking meditation practice. Find a place where you enjoy being. I mean, like the park, we'll be going to the park and just, very gently just walk back and forth as a way of supporting the mind to settle, to feel calm. Being with nature is incredibly helpful because it's very calming, it's soothing, and it's very beautiful. I mean, the trees, the flowers, the animals. I used to like watching the ducks. The ducks are very uncomplicated creatures. They just swim around in the pond and get on with their lives. So, contemplating nature can be very helpful. So if you find that long periods of sitting don't really support well-being, then these are other things that you can do. But I would encourage you to, maybe a different kind of meditation. I mean, sometimes very focused meditation can actually bring us down a bit, but one of the things I find helpful is just sitting in a chair and just noticing what your mind is doing, just observing the kind of thoughts that you're having. Because often, if we're feeling a little bit low, then there are accompanying depressing thoughts, often thoughts about how we're not worthy, not good enough, or thoughts of difficult things that have happened to us. And you can also contemplate the possibility of replacing those thoughts with other thoughts. So there's a story I often tell about when I was on retreat one time and I overslept, and suddenly this whole litany of all the things that I had done in my life that weren't very good and how hopeless my meditation was. And I just decided just to stop it and said, Chandasiri, everything you do on this retreat is good practice. And so I made this my mantra. So every time my mind was about to go into a negative train of thought, Chandasiri, everything you do on this retreat is good practice. So sometimes I would rest and my mind would say, oh, you should be walking, walking. And so I would go and do walking. Oh, Chandasiri, you should be resting, you should rest more. Chandasiri, everything you do on this retreat is good practice. And whether it was or not, I felt much happier because I had stopped having the thoughts that made me miserable. Instead, I'd replaced it with thoughts that made me happy. And it's almost as though, like, the thoughts that make us miserable, it's a creation of the mind, it's a fabrication of the mind, in fact. So you can say, well, it's illusion. And you could say, well, equally, the happy thoughts, they're an illusion too. But frankly, I'd much rather have a happy illusion than a miserable illusion. So that's another suggestion. You know, if you're able to do that, just notice, maybe just notice one kind of thing that you say to yourself. I mean, sometimes you can write it down. And Ajahn Sumedho, apparently, he used to write down thoughts. He'd fill whole exercise books with, a particular thought about somebody or something, just as a way of kind of making it conscious and then working with it, transforming it. Like a way of observing thought as a phenomenon, rather than believing in it. So that's something else you can try. So it's like a slightly different kind of meditation. Rather than being very focused on an object, it's like just experimenting, playing with your mind in a different way as a strategy for supporting well-being. Many people experience depression, and it's a normal part of life, and there's a lot we can learn from it, and it's good if we can find ways to lift ourselves out as well. So these are a few possible strategies that you might like to try. Okay. Another question.
So when you talked about going outside and being with the nature, and that's really helpful, would that mean that you are engaging your senses? Yes?
Yes, of course. Yes. You can do that consciously as a kind of practice. You can say, right now I'm going to focus on seeing, I'm going to focus on smelling or whatever.
Yes.
Or you can just go out and they'll get engaged anyway.
Yes.
There's plenty to see. And that kind of gets you out of here.
Yeah.
So
it brings a lot of joy.
Can do, yes.
I mean, when you feel the breeze and...
Yes. We're allowed to enjoy nature. That's part of the practice. So, yes.
Ajahn, when I met you the first time, I mentioned to you that there's been a process of unlearning, and the subject of this retreat that you put, kindness and anatta. And there was a bit of how can you give metta to yourself? Isn't it a kind of a state of a megalomania that, I am saying love to myself? And I tried it, and it kind of works. I think we didn't. I didn't understand the meaning of metta up till now, and like how Sir also said, the self. I don't know what happened. I can't even describe it, but it's something like I found that when you're giving metta to yourself, somehow your ego is also diminishing to a certain extent, because it's coming from a state of egolessness. That's the only way that you could give metta to yourself. Otherwise it was just shining on your crazy diamond, And please tell us more how to shine that state, because it's a very beautiful state of that metta. You see, I always thought that I have to work hard, watching my breath, watching my sensations, and then I'm going to be pure mind, and then metta is going to come out. But it's we start with metta the way you started it. I had this thing, wait a minute, how can I do metta to myself? Am I not shining my ego a little bit, but it worked, Please give some more shining thoughts on that, because it's so beautiful state, it's what I'm trying to, I don't know if, I cannot even explain that state, what it was, but it was something beautiful.
Yes, and I hope that I hope it'll arise again over these days. And I urge you to not to be too concerned about recreating it. But I really celebrate that you have had a sense of the possibility of that practice. And I think it's something, it took me years of kind of reflecting and considering to see that actually this was the way round it had to be, certainly for myself, that sort of driving myself to meditate so that I could feel worthy and feel good about myself just didn't work. And it was only when I recognized that actually what is necessary is a kind of basis of well-being before the mind is able to really calm down and settle and feel that spaciousness and joy. So it's almost as though we've kind of slightly misunderstood what the Buddha was talking about. We've kind of created a kind of work ethic around it. So that the Buddha was a kind of slave driver. You've got to do this, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, and get samadhi together. And then maybe, if you're very, very good, then you might have a little bit of bliss. But actually, when you look into the suttas, and just his generosity, his grandness of heart in being willing to offer the teachings in the first place, he saw that there were people with just a little bit of dust, a little bit of encouragement who would be able to understand. So out of compassion for their welfare, he offered this teaching, not to give them another burden to carry around to make themselves feel miserable about, to make them sort of, so I've spoken to so many people who sort of worry about their practice. My practice is not good enough, I don't practice hard enough, I don't do enough, I haven't been on enough retreats, I haven't done this, I haven't done that. That may be true, but what the basic thing that they've got wrong is that they haven't actually got a sense of self-respect and a sense of their own worthiness to start with. So to start off from a basis of well-being, so rather than meditating to generate a basis of well-being, we have to generate a basis of well-being in order to enable the mind to settle and for the understanding to arise. That's been my experience. So I'm delighted that you were willing to just give it a try and see, and that you found that it brought a sense of happiness and lightness and joy. And it's not that you give up on the other practices. They're perfectly valid and very important. It's very important to be able to learn how to focus the mind, to gather the awareness, in order to investigate. And it's helpful if we begin by celebrating the fact that we have these teachings and we have the capacity to understand these teachings and we have the opportunity to practice. This is something that we can really use as a kind of resource, like a something to nourish us and to bring that sense of happiness into the heart. Rather than struggling to get a sense of happiness when, the conditions are there. We just haven't allowed ourselves to experience them because we're so afraid of boosting up our ego. We don't want to get conceited. But as you say, it's funny because the ego does seem to diminish. We begin to realize that we're so busy trying to not have a big ego that we actually create an enormous ego that doesn't have a big ego, which is, we get very complicated. Whereas saying another time about how we're just part of humanity, and all of humanity deserves our loving attention. And this part of humanity just as much as every other part of humanity. Why do we leave ourselves out? So I've found in my own practice that rather than trying to have metta for everybody else, when I don't have metta for this one, just doesn't work. So beginning here, making friends with this, having a sense of acceptance and self-respect for this being, is a very important first step. And importantly, not just for the good aspects of this being, for the successful, wonderful bits of this being, the handsome, good-looking bits of this being, the bits that I like of this being, but all of the difficult things of this being, all the uncertainty, the doubt, the confusion, the fear, the anxiety, the nastiness, all of these things we need to learn how to accept and to shine the light of kindness onto. So this is where the recollection of Buddha as Lokavidu, one who knows the world. I like to see that he knows all of the sort of grungy, unpleasant little aspects that human beings can experience, and shine the light of wisdom in there. Because only then can we really let them go. Otherwise they just stay lodged in there, and we kind of push them down and try to kind of push them down or squash them in so that they don't kind of manifest in too obvious a way. And we tie ourselves up in knots. So it's not that we like our nastiness and our meanness and our competitiveness and our jealousy and our doubt and our fear and our insecurity. We don't like those things, but we can accept them with a heart of kindness. This is part of the human condition. I'm a human being. And as a human being, these are things that human beings are subject to. And when we do that, there's the natural arising of kindness and compassion towards all beings. So even the dictators, the megalomaniacs, even all the bad people, the worst people in the world, we can understand, we can empathize, because we recognize that we have the seeds of that. Fortunately, we've landed up on this way of practice, so it's very unlikely that they're going to blossom and manifest. But we know what it's like. Often these things arise from fear, and when we can open to and acknowledge our own fear, that's a very helpful first step. So this practice is very much about, it's just like opening the whole box and bringing the light of kindness onto it, shining the light of kindness on it, kindness and compassion. So, as I see it, it really has to begin here. And it's really, you've discovered a happy result, a surprisingly happy result. And my sense is that that's what happens. There is a sense of lightness and joy as we can acknowledge these things. But it can be so difficult. Sometimes it's the last thing we want to acknowledge or do. It's just like being pushed into a corner and you say, no, not me. And then you realize, yes, that it is you. These things do happen for you. Not me as an ego person, but me as a human being. This is something that I'm subject to, because I'm part of humanity. So.
Just to take this dialogue a little further, was it that you had created an I and the rest of the world different? So the metta that you were giving, it was from a very egoistic kind of a situation that, I'm giving metta to the other guys, but you forgot that this guy inside also needs that metta. And the foundation of metta actually starts when you start giving metta to yourself and start accepting that what I understand from this dialogue that you just gave, that you have kind of made yourself one with the entire universe, and the metta started from here, and it automatically starts moving out. And that's when you see that the diminishing of that anatta state starts getting low. I can't explain. It's, you had created this false kind of a, and this false kind of a megalomania, and then you never gave metta to yourself. All the Ajahns were always, many of the Ajahns, they said that give metta to yourself, but I could never understand, how can you give metta to yourself? Metta is supposed to be to the other guy. How can I can be egoistic that I am saying, may I be happy? So I'm so selfish to my, I'm trying to grab it for myself rather. But actually it was totally wrong, it's false. You just tried it, a little bit, and it works. And it's a very beautiful state that you start coming into, and it's a very calm state as you rightly described it. And I just wanted to say thank you, and it's a wonderful dialogue about it. Yeah. Well, that's the unlearning. My friend, that's the unlearning that we got to do. That's the unlearning. We have taken it in a very different way. It takes a long time to unlearn what we've done, because I have to sit this, and I have to sit 1 hour without moving. What happens if it's spinning? Okay, I move it a little bit. Be kind to myself. I mean, there's this big thing that I have to not move my leg, my hand, and then in my heart I would say that, the guy at the back, he's looking at me, and see how I sat the whole hour, there was a little bit of shine on my thing, and I saw the guy in front, and I think it was a big, I'm just unlearning a little bit.
It's kind of coming into balance.
Yeah.
Like in life, sometimes we go a bit off this way, and so we have to balance by going this way. So it's like coming into balance. I think the hard work that you've done on retreats has definitely been of great value.
Yeah.
And now's a chance to find a different kind of approach. So you find the middle.
That's what I'm trying. I think for me it's a sense of unlearning of many things.
Yeah.
Of that very hard penance that we were up to, and just take it easy and be cool and chilled out about it. That's a way of. But what I was not able to understand was how kindness and anatta could go, but it works. That's, and it kind of worked. I think that's what I felt. Yeah. Thank you, Ajahn.
There's another question, okay? Let's make this the last one. Yes?
Thank you, Ajahn. We believe that we carry impressions from previous lives. Is ego also something like this? Where does ego come from? It certainly doesn't seem to come from the body. Seems more like a mental disorder, if I might say. Where does it originate from? Where does it come from?
It's a good question. My sense is, this is a very simplified version, and I invite anybody to correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense is that at the moment of death, if we haven't fully understood the nature of the ego and let it go completely, if there's still a little bit of attachment to any one of the 5 khandhas, any kind of interest in any of them, any kind of desire or leaning into the future, wanting a continuity of any kind, then that kind of stream or energy is what will lead us into our future existence. So if there's a very strong sense of being somebody, then I'm imagining that at the moment of death, that sort of interest and the kind of composite somebodyness, you call it ego, is what propels the energy to find another situation in which to be reborn. So certainly there are cases where people can remember previous existences, and you may yourself have had some experience of that. But the idea is to let go of any sense of existence in the future. So the willingness, it's just kind of a willingness to end, rather than to keep on continuing. And that really only comes about when you really know that form is not self, feeling is not self, and so on. And there's a readiness. The relinquishment just happens. You don't even think about it. You're just no longer interested. So there's a number of suttas where the Buddha gave teachings about these things, and the people listening, they have this word nibbindati. They just were no longer interested. It wasn't a matter of concern for them anymore. And so there was no longer any tendency to be reborn in any form at all. Does that kind of make sense? Any further comments? Oh, okay. So there's one over here and one over here. Several. Come here first, and then it can come across. Oh, now we can have a competition. Okay. Where do we start? You start with you. Okay, you start. He's inviting you to start, so he can have the last word.
No, I was just thinking, and from a personal perspective, that when would I be willing to end my willingness, not making a generalized statement, but my willingness to end the continuous engagement with different khandas would come about when I see something more like a happy or a more peaceful state, and I can see that in reach, and I think I will automatically give up because there's no point. I believe somewhere Buddha saw it so clearly that it was foolish to have continued with anything else. Yeah. And I wonder how we can kind of get a glimpse or be sure about that. A steadfastness in that which allows us to relinquish.
I'll just quickly respond to that, and then you can have your question. By observing dukkha. So, that will be my response to your question. So that will be how to relinquish them is by recognizing and understanding the suffering associated with the involvement with them. When you see that something is maybe very attractive, very delicious, very wonderful, and you keep grasping it, and you notice that actually it doesn't make you feel very peaceful and happy, it just leads to more agitation, then you begin to question, well, is it really worth grasping it? And you lose interest. You say, oh, no. So by contemplating the unsatisfactoriness would be a simple answer to your question.
That part I get, but what I can't see yet is the tranquil, peaceful, the highly desirable, deathless state. I feel somewhere that would become the motivation. To amplify what I am saying, like when I was just out of IIT and I was exposed, fortunately I was exposed to meditation, Vipassana. I came in contact almost the same time as Professor Dhar. And I kind of remember making a very clear choice. I was saying, when Buddha made his choice, he was very clear. He was not interested in the world. And I looked at my own interest and I said, look, I still am interested in life.
Yeah.
And it was, and today I was reading a book in the morning, which is about the conditionalities. And there's a clear statement that when Buddha attained realization, he could see that people just wouldn't understand him because they were, like me, so interested in enjoying temporary joys of acquiring and all that. And I could see the relevance of it now. Today, which is maybe 30 years after I had that thought, and it seems that it's making more sense now than it was making then. But I still feel that my motivation to dedicate my life just to that would have been so much easier if I had a glimpse of a supreme state which is not possible through the worldly pleasures, so to say.
So you were asking how to experience that supreme state. Yes. Yeah. Well, it would be nice. And you may perhaps have had a glimpse of it sometimes. But in the absence of that, then what I said before is to contemplate the unsatisfactoriness of the other things that you invest in your life.
And do not get the lasting happiness.
That don't lead to lasting happiness. Really contemplate those things. And with the letting go of those things, I'm imagining that there would be a moment of peace. You know, when you really want something or you're really engaged in a struggle of some kind and you just let it go. I mean, you might not have any fanfare of trumpets or bright lights or anything, but just a moment of quiet. So maybe you're looking too high. Maybe it's actually a little bit more ordinary than you imagine. Okay. Yes, your question now.
I was actually trying to, what my friend was just talking about, the ego. I mean, I spent about 70 years of my life now, and in that there have been phases when I had no ego at all, and then peak of ego, and then gradually it came down, and today I'm at a level where I can say, yes, I've almost relinquished it. Because I now see that when I relate my entire life to this particular thing, and why I had it, and why didn't I have it, and how it has now, there's a cessation of ego. So I find that it is all because of the mental state that I was getting a lot of appreciation, and those things happened in my life, and so the ego naturally got over me. And all of a sudden you find you are nobody, and you have voluntarily tried to do so, and you feel, okay, the ego, there is no more ego now. So nothing disturbs. So I feel that this has helped a lot, definitely. I mean, when you sit for meditation, and I think these are the things which help us to clear our vision about this ego.
So this is just, you're just saying something rather than looking for a response. Yeah, okay, thank you. So, this has been a long session, and I'm wondering whether we should go out for a walk right now, rather than, I was going to suggest that we do our walking at 3:15, but I think we've been sitting for quite a long time, and so might be good to walk now. So walking in the park meditation is something that you can do any time. You don't have to be on retreat. And some people mentioned how much more active their mind was in the park. It was the mind pulled into different directions. And this is something we can notice, and we can, having practiced the walking meditation where we really just focus on the body walking, we can experiment with that in our daily lives. Just seeing if you can walk without allowing the mind to engage with the past or the future or things around us, but rather just very much connected with the body and the walking. And as I said earlier on, it can be a very helpful practice, particularly if we have many duties and responsibilities or difficult situations to deal with, rather than just habitually churning things over in the mind, just to really stay focused and to allow the mind to have a bit of a rest, to settle in this way. And obviously it's very pleasant being outside with trees and the grass and so on. So I'm glad we were able to do that, and maybe we'll do it again at some point. So I'm pondering now whether you would appreciate a chance just to sit very quietly for the next while up until tea time, or whether you would like me to introduce the asking questions meditation, which I spoke about earlier, the stopping the mind practice. Sorry? Asking question meditation, instant response. Okay, well, let's have a go at asking question meditation. As I said, this is a practice that is very commonly used within the Zen tradition of Buddhism, where it's their main practice, in fact, asking questions. They call it a koan. And I've never practiced within that tradition, and some of the questions are very unfathomable, I find. But Ajahn Sumedho introduced this practice during the first retreat I did, and I found it very helpful using questions that are we could answer intellectually. We could come up with an intellectual response if we put our minds to it. But what generally happens as soon as we hear the question is that the mind goes quiet. There's no need to find an intellectual response. The mind may try to find one, but that's not the point of the exercise. What we're trying to do is to experience the quiet of the mind, which arises when a question is asked that we don't have an answer for, not an immediate answer for. And the encouragement is just to stay with that feeling of quiet, inner quiet. It may just be there for a fraction of a second, or it may remain for a little while. And then I'll ask another question. So, as I said, these questions are not questions looking for an intellectual answer. They're questions just for the mind to receive and respond, experience the state of not having an immediate response. It's like a deliberately constructed doubt, where we don't know what to do. Shall I do this? Shall I do that? And the mind stops. So that's the intention behind the practice. So I invite those of you who would like to try it to join in as I offer the guidance. And if you prefer just to follow your usual practice, that's of course absolutely fine. But what I'm doing is I'm introducing another strategy, another way of working with the mind, or maybe we should say playing with the mind. So as normal, we take time to find our preferred meditation posture. So if we can, sitting up nice and straight, ideally not leaning back into a chair or anything, but just sitting upright, using the energy of the body to maintain a sense of uprightness. And this is very supportive, this is very helpful for the mind. An upright body supports an upright, attentive mind. Not rigid or stiff, but just alert, poised. And you may like to meditate with the eyes open or closed, it doesn't matter. But basically the attention is turned inward. And you can use the breath as a focus to support a sense of presence. And then in a while I'll ask the first question. And what I'll do is I'll wait for for a short period of time and then either repeat the question or formulate another question. And I'll do this probably for about maybe 10 questions, spaced out, and then after that I'll leave you, and if you want to experiment with your own questions that you can just bring up into consciousness as you're sitting. And remember, you don't have to find an answer. Just listen to the question and listen to the space that comes after the question. Who is here? What is here? Where am I? Who is sitting? Who is sitting? Who hears? What is thinking? What is this body? Who knows? What is here? What is breathing? How do I know that my body is upright? What is thinking? How is it right now? Am I at ease? What is body? Where is mind? What is space? So, this is something that you can experiment with. I think for some of you, a little bit sleepy, and it actually takes quite a bit of energy to be able to come up with the questions and to focus the mind in that way. But if you do it, if you bring energy into it, it can be a very energizing practice. And it can also be calming, and it can also support understanding. Because this practice is, we certainly study, we learn things from the texts, but a lot of our study is not really about words or language at all, but much more about direct experience. And when we contemplate things like what is body, we have actual experience of the body. There's no intellectual answer for that, it's just you know, this is body. And a way of examining different aspects of our experience. Sometimes I use it with pain. If I have a pain in my knee, just the question, well, how do I know I've got a pain in my knee? Is it something I feel in my knee, or is it something in my head? And it can be quite an interesting line of inquiry. So it's sort of at least two benefits. One is the way the supporting of the mind coming into a very direct sense of presence, and also the different kinds of investigation that we can do. Like, where is mind? What is mind? How big is my mind? These are also interesting questions to explore. I almost asked, how big is the universe? Anyway, we have a little bit more time before the end of the afternoon, and I suggest if you want to stand up well, those of you who would like to stand up for a few minutes just to bring a bit of energy, and if you're comfortable and awake and alert sitting, that's fine, and we'll just carry on sitting quietly until 5 o'clock. But do stand up for a few minutes if you would like to do that, just to bring some energy into the system. And then sit down and continue when you're ready.